Welcome to Beyond Tech, where innovation meets insight. I'm your host, Jackie Slatt. Today, we're exploring what happens to an organization after growth through expansion or acquisition and the challenge of unifying the newly acquired facilities that each come with their own systems, standards, and operational cultures. We're joined by eTech Group's Director of IT/OT Solutions, Eric Medecke. Throughout his career, Eric has experience helping organizations navigate the complexity of multi-site standardization. This is something that eTech Group has experienced firsthand, primarily on the data side rather than the manufacturing floor. eTech Group was formed and continues to grow through mergers and acquisitions. And along that journey, we've repeatedly seen the challenges and limitations that arise when information isn't standardized. Eric, from a manufacturing perspective, can you share at a high level what are some of the common hurdles and challenges organizations face when there's a lack of standardization?
Yeah, absolutely, Jackie. What we see a lot of the challenges out there are when we have these types of things, there's lack of standardization. And what it does is it creates inconsistent operations, higher risks for the company, and limited scalability. So basically, what happens is each plant becomes its own ecosystem instead of part of an enterprise. There's things that we're trying to get to in regards to Industry 4.0, 5.0. And when you don't have standardization and things like that, you can't scale data AI, automation without standardization foundation. There's things that you talked about there that people struggle with and part of their challenges with acquisitions. With every acquisition, it introduces things like different architectures, different vendors, unknown risks. And so this is why standardization is really a big deal when it comes to the systems across the plants. Another thing there is, without the standardization in the plants, you can't aggregate data or trust the data across the sites. It's so inconsistent. And when people struggle with centralized visibility, you can potentially have higher downtime, slower troubleshooting, and you can miss out on predictive maintenance and optimization times, which is really critical. So this is why we look at what are some of the challenges we see in
Yeah. So one of the things I guess that you've mentioned that standardizing the data so that you can be ready to take advantage of AI, all of that predictive maintenance, AI, anything like that relies on the data and it being accessible from, I guess, whoever needs to get it, but it can't transfer between machines or facilities if it's not entered in a standardized fashion. Am I understanding correctly?
Yeah, you are. You're spot on when it comes to that.
One of the things that I think we also want to touch on is without the standardization is it's creating these islands of automations for a facility. Can you talk about, I guess, why that is bad and what that limits a facility if they have these islands of automation?
Sure, yeah. When you have islands of automation inside a plant or inside a facility, you end up with a lot of times with poor documentation. People don't understand what's there. You have inconsistent networks, and it equals basically, in my eyes, integration friction between everybody. The new equipment can't easily connect. Sometimes they become isolated. What we talk about and then what that causes is basically data. We call them data silos, where you're unable to gather the information from those because they're not interconnected. So those are the islands of automation. There's a lot of manual workarounds that are required, and you have a lot of reduced ROI on new equipment.
I feel like you kind of hit on this with the islands of automation and kind of making facilities having a culture of kind of making it work engineering. Why is that bad? And what does that prohibit them from doing when they're just sort of coming up with workarounds and making it work so they can keep the plant working for the time being?
Yeah, I think what I understood the question to be is, whatever worked at the time of engineering, when they created these things, right? A lot of things were built for uptime and not scalability and visibility. Today, we need more and more visibility into our networks to understand risk and cyber and security, things of that nature, right? If they're not built for uptime and scalability or visibility, it creates inconsistent designs across the plants, limited documentation, agile environments, a lot of shifts happening right there today, right? Where we have IT already modernized pieces of the puzzle. And now the OT department, the OT side of the fence is now under lots and lots of pressure to deliver data and integration and the visibility that's required to meet compliance today.
One of the things you touched on was standardizing cybersecurity across multiple facilities. Can you expand on that a little bit and what that means across multiple locations and how, I guess, what they standardize and how they do that?
Right. Oh, I understand. Yeah, cybersecurity across different multiple plants or even individual, right? Maturity varies widely when you take a look at it. Some people have integrated IT/OT strategies, but others operate independently with a lot of gaps. We see a lot of gaps when it comes to bridging the gap between IT and OT. IT doesn't always understand what's in the OT environment. OT doesn't always understand what the direction that IT is forced to do and how that happens, right? So there's different drivers there. You get different leadership priorities, leadership priorities on the IT side versus IT OT priorities, which you've got different types of systems there. There's different types of legacy systems that IT doesn't necessarily understand. What that causes is a varying awareness, I would say, of risk and the insurance implications around that stuff. And so why do we standardize around cybersecurity? Basically, it's risk. Risk is enterprise wide. It's not necessarily site specific, right? It's everything all encompassing. So one weak facility equals exposure for all the facilities. And so that is very,
Especially when they're all connected.
and that, yeah, absolutely. When they're all connected. So the risk is very high. So this is why we want to standardize on consistent protection, the visibility that we have in the plants to enable us to have faster response to respond to a threat or something like that, not only in a single facility, but across multiple sites, like an enterprise wide environment.
And you and I talked uh, on a previous podcast episode about how just the risk to the OT network are increasingly becoming targets for ransomware attacks or any sort of cyber attack because they're vulnerable and not as necessarily protected. That was a good episode too. Everybody should go check it out.
No, yeah, that actually was. It was really good. But I think that there's a lot of unknowns out there when it comes to the risks. So there's a lot of hidden risks, we'll call it. There's hidden risks in every facility, I would say today. There's also a lot of hidden risks in things like acquisitions. Those probably have some of the more higher risks out there. The unknown vulnerabilities that exist are staggering. You've got a lot of aging infrastructure that could potentially be causing downtime due to those risks. You have systems that are misconfigured or they're unsupported, which leads into more risk. And then one of the biggest risks is lack of OT visibility from the IT departments, right? So our IT departments are tasked with all of these cybersecurity compliance and regulations and insurance regulations to try to make sure that they can achieve compliance in order to get cyber insurance and things like that. So yeah, it's very, very important to understand what those risks are. Like in order what I typically recommend people to do to understand what those risks are around those are to take and look at things like assessments, ITOT assessments in those environments to help uncover hidden failure points, security gaps, and operational inefficiency, obsolescence of equipment, things like that.
Yeah. One of the big topics that I think everybody is talking about, and so I want to make sure we hit on it a little bit, is just being able to leverage AI on the manufacturing floor, or I mean, anywhere. I feel like everybody's still trying to come up with the best solutions and uses for AI and see what it can do. Can you talk a little bit about how an ITOT assessment is a good foundation for getting ready to use AI?
Yeah, absolutely. AI is ever changing and a very big part of everything today. And so it's very important that we leverage those types of utilities. But how do we get there? At the end of the day, we have to look at all the infrastructures that are in our plants today, in our facilities. The infrastructure to support that is very critical. If you don't have the correct infrastructure, we can't gather the correct information from AI to make those predictive changes or eventually even become generative changes using generative AI to make changes and act on behalf of a human. Obviously, predictive AI is really the probably some of the best ways to understand what's going on in your facility and allows human to make those decisions. But as we get more and more into AI and deeper into things, we have to make sure our infrastructures are there in place and they're secure, they're segmented, and they're routable. And when we have those types of infrastructures, then we set the groundwork. We have the foundation for things like all of the OE type data, the AI, the analytics, all that type of stuff.
I think it goes without saying, but for AI to be especially useful, it needs all the data, and standardization plays right into that. So you can take advantage of um, of utilizing AI, but to really take advantage of it, you need the data.
Yeah, I think you do. I think you need to take advantage of it because what we're seeing today, I think everybody understands that um, we have a big challenge with the workforce today. People aging out, loss of all that institutional knowledge, the skills and the resources to be able to modernize stuff. It's just not. It's not there. We're losing that stuff. So to have things like AI and to be able to gather that information and to be able to assist the future generations in production facilities is very critical.
So what are some of the, I guess, kind of going the other direction? Some facilities are, I believe you would agree and have probably been in some, but some are decades behind. I guess how does that happen, and what do they do to kind of start upgrading and getting ready for AI, digital transformation, standardization, any of it?
Yeah. Well, I mean, like what we all know is that we have a lot of equipment in a lot of facilities that hasn't made sense necessarily to upgrade over the years because upgrading the equipment, did it allow us to make more widgets? Was it cost effective? And the answer is no, a lot of times. And a lot of times, the people in the plants were able to add different equipment, things of that nature, and make things work, whether it was stringing, data cabling from one point to another, things of that nature. They were able to make things work and keep them going. But what we typically do a lot of times to understand what that's like and how we go about that next step is we have to uncover what actually exists in those plants, looking at the health of the network. Where's the architecture gap? We're looking at cybersecurity posture, operational risks. And when we do that through assessments, it helps us to create a baseline at the end of the day. It's a very, very clear value to leadership. It allows us to create that prioritized roadmap, right? And it allows us to focus on the biggest risks and the highest ROI and improvements in those in your facility today. And it'll allow C level people to be informed on investment decisions.
What do you think? Because I know you've been in a lot of facilities reporting on assessments and kind of uncovering things for them. What is the biggest value that clients get out of an assessment that they've kind of said to you, oh my gosh, this was so great. Thank you. We now know this.
I think the biggest thing that people get out of an assessment is the understanding of what's in their facility, what's talking to what from a process standpoint. That allows us to understand what the security posture is. Where are our vulnerabilities, right? Where are the CVEs that potentially exist? Where are our risks that could potentially cause us downtime? And so I think along with that type of data that you grab from doing that type of assessment, it allows you to take that information and to put that roadmap together to understand where you have obsolescence and where you need to focus your dollars at the end of the day. So I think that that is one of the biggest thing our customers find is understanding not only what's there, but how to get to the next step. What is the roadmap to recovery or the roadmap to getting with the times, upgrading, right? I think it's really critical.
Yeah. And you said one of the things that you've uncovered is what's talking to what, or maybe what's not talking to anything and kind of just out there on its own. So that was great. I don't think I have any other kind of focused questions, but is there anything else you'd like to add on or hit on before we move to what I call the fun closing questions?
I don't know necessarily, other than the fact that there's a lot of things that companies don't realize they're inheriting when they do acquisitions, like the hidden risks we talked about, their
Hmm.
outdated systems, the poor documentation, problems that no one knew even existed that you find and uncover from doing assessments, the lack of standardization that we talked about a little bit. It's a blocker when it comes to Industry 4.0.
Yeah.
Another thing that you might want to think about when you remember is you can't scale. You have to standardize first and then optimize. It's not a thing otherwise. But yeah, so I think that the actionable item in my mind is you got to start with a baseline assessment, know what you actually have out there. And that's the simplest place to start, right? Standardize the visibility into what you have, your asset inventory, the network understanding before you can do anything else.
Yeah, one of the things in my former life, I worked in real estate, and what I've always kind of associated ITOT assessments as like a home inspection essentially, but it's just on an industrial facility, but you're getting a view of kind of everything and what may be a risk, what you may want to tackle first, and what's a critical priority versus what is, possibly a concern, but you maybe don't need to address right away. I don't know if that's just my thinking, but that's always what sort of made sense to me.
Yeah, you're spot on. I mean, it's really you get to the end of the day, you don't go out and buy a house without an inspection typically. Um,
Not
because
recommended.
not recommended because I feel like if you're buying a house, you're excited about the experience, you're excited about what you're seeing, and you may have a little bit of tunnel vision, I call it, and you don't understand or see what the risks are, the things that you might not be looking for, where you have that inspection and they go in and they take a look at everything and they give you that report and you kind of have an understanding. And with that understanding, you create the path forward. You say, hey, am I going to buy this facility or this house? And and what is it that I need to do in order to get this place to where I need it to be? And you create that plan. It's no different than an ITOT assessment at the end of the day.
Yeah. One of the other things you touched on is, needing to standardize before you can look at scaling out and having like this enterprise wide system. I just want to kind of I don't know what to like selfishly call how eTech Group has the CSI enterprise certification, and part of that was standardizing our own processes across all of our facilities so we can deliver the same service, regardless of what location or who you're working with. So kind of the same sort of methodology of, we want to continue to grow. And to do that, we have needed to standardize our practices and data and all kinds of other things. So we definitely understand the pain of growing, but also the excitement. So I want to thank you for kind of sharing some insight with us today. I do always like to end on a few fun questions. So the first one I have for you, Eric, is what's one lesson you've learned the hard way during your career?
One lesson I've learned the hard way: do it right the first time. Spend a little bit extra time to do it right. If you don't have time to do it right the first time, then don't do it at all. Sometimes I see out there where sometimes people are like, we have time to do it twice, but we don't have time to do it right the first time. And so instill that into all of my engineers all the time that it is very important to take a moment and to do it right the first time.
Measure twice, cut once.
Measure twice, cut once, measure three times, cut once, whatever it takes to do it right.
Yeah. Now, this is one of my favorite questions is if you could automate one thing in your life, what would it be?
If I was going to automate one thing in my life, would probably be my laundry.
Well, that's a good one for me too. But when I say laundry, I mean I want it to be folded and put away.
Yeah. When you
All of
say
it.
automate, that's exactly what I'm talking about.
I need like a Jetsons type robot. So I currently have 4 baskets of laundry nicely folded, but they cannot make it upstairs and put away. They're just part of my living room and they may live there for the next 2 weeks.
Well, by the Jetsons, we're about to
Yes. All right. One of my other favorite questions is how would you explain your job to a 5-year-old and or
okay.
me?
I would explain my job to a 5-year-old as that, I help people in the manufacturing space, people that make things like your toys or your gadgets and things like that. I help those people to make sure that their machines and the things that make the things that you love the most work every day.
That's a good one. I love that question. I get so many different answers and it's so fun. My last question is what would you like to see us cover on future episodes of Beyond Tech?
What would I love for us to see in futures of on tech? I think it's very important that we help our listeners with things like cybersecurity, compliance, and how we get there right. Maybe some of the tools or some of the things that we have that we are able to not only use to give them insight into all the things we talked about today, but tools that can be left behind that they don't have to be an expert to use, that will always give them the ability to have those kind of like live assessments and live baselines and
Hmm.
understand where their risks are at any given moment. And that will help those businesses absolutely hands down. And that is something that the industry has been lacking for a long time. And we have that ability to give to our clients.
Now you've just volunteered for another podcast episode. But that's for another day. So I want to thank you for joining us this afternoon, and hopefully this wasn't too painful and maybe a little bit of fun.
No, it's fun. It's always fun. It's enjoyable.